Welcome back, everybody, to another Deep Dive. This time we're taking a look at Mauro Biglino and his, well, some might say controversial ideas about the Bible.
I mean, yeah, he's definitely got some interesting takes.
So what's interesting about Biglino is he kind of says, well, you got to read the Bible literally. Like he's saying all these stories are actual historical events.
Yeah, it's not your typical Sunday school interpretation.
No,
Yeah.
not at all. And today we're looking at one of his lectures. And in this lecture, he's going deep into the whole biblical timeline and the idea that, like, humans and the Elohim, like, actually lived together at one point.
Right, and just so everyone's clear, the word Elohim often gets translated as God, right, in, like, English Bibles, but in the original Hebrew, it can be plural, so, like, it can mean multiple beings.
Oh, wow. So right off the bat, that adds a whole new layer to things.
For sure.
And, like, visually, in this lecture, Biglino has all these stacks of books around him.
Yeah. It's like a visual representation of how much research he's done. Like, he's not just making stuff up. He's got, like, all this historical context and ancient texts he's pulling from.
It's impressive.
It is.
And one of the things that caught my eye right away was his question about Cain. Like, after he kills Abel, he's afraid of being killed himself. But if Cain and Abel were the only children of Adam and Eve, then who is he afraid of?
Right, like, that's a good question. That's where Biglino brings up this idea that there were other non-Adamic people around, like other beings that might have been a threat to Cain.
That makes you think about those early Bible stories in a whole new way.
It does. It's like, it's not just this little family. It's a bigger, more complex world.
Exactly.
Right.
And add to that, Biglino brings in Rashi, a Jewish scholar, and he interprets the story as Cain and Abel each being born with twin sisters.
Yeah, so all of a sudden it's not just a small family anymore.
Well, hold on, twin sisters.
Mm-hmm.
So there are more people descended from Adam and Eve running around.
Yeah, potentially. And then think about it, those biblical genealogies, those people lived for a long time.
Oh yeah, like Adam lived to be, what, 930?
Exactly, 930 years. So you're not just looking at like one generation after another. These people were all alive at the same time, like a big interconnected group.
So you've got this potentially large population, maybe some tension with other beings, and then we get to Seth. Is there something special about his birth?
Well, Biglino points out that Genesis uses specific language when talking about Seth's birth in his own image and likeness, the same wording that's used for Adam's creation.
Huh, so Biglino sees a connection there. Like maybe there was some kind of genetic intervention in Seth's birth, similar to Adam.
Yeah, that's what he's getting at. And it makes you wonder why that specific language was used for Seth. What does it really mean?
Things are getting complicated. And then we have Yahweh entering the picture. What does Biglino say about that?
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. Biglino points out that the name Yahweh doesn't actually show up until Enosh, who's Seth's son. So he's saying that Yahweh came on the scene later than the Elohim who were hanging out in the Garden of Eden.
So first you have the Elohim creating Adam and Eve, maybe messing with Seth's birth, and then Yahweh shows up later.
Yeah, and remember, Yahweh is often described as a man of war, so Biglino's suggesting his role might have been totally different than those earlier Elohim, maybe even like a power struggle or conflict between different Elohim.
Oh, hold up a second. Now we're talking about cosmic power struggles and warring Elohim factions. This is intense.
It is, and it gets even crazier when we get to the rebellious angels and them coming down to earth, which Biglino takes very literally.
Yeah, the 200 angels in the Book of Enoch. Now that's where things really take a turn. We'll get into that right after this.
Welcome back. So we were about to get into the whole rebellious angels thing from the Book of Enoch.
Yeah, this part is like fascinating and kind of creepy all at the same time. These angels like rebelled against heaven and then came down to earth and like messed things up for everyone.
And remember, Biglino's reading all this literally, so it's not some metaphor or symbolic story. He thinks these were real beings who interacted with humans.
Which leads to some pretty wild interpretations. Like when you bring in Rashi, he said these angels were engaging in the rite of the first night with human women.
Yeah, it's definitely a sensitive topic, but we gotta talk about it because it's in these ancient texts.
Right, we can't shy away from the tough stuff. And speaking of tough stuff, let's talk about the flood. What does Biglino say about that?
Well, his theory is that the Elohim did it on purpose, like a reset button for the world, because things were getting too chaotic and mixed up.
So like wiping the slate clean and starting over with Noah?
Yeah, kind of. Biglino says Noah was chosen because he was righteous, like representing a pure lineage.
But even after the flood, the Elohim are still interacting with humans. It's like the flood didn't really get rid of them completely.
Yeah, it shows they were still involved even after this massive event.
Okay, so moving on. We get to the Tower of Babel. What's happening there according to Viglino?
Well, the Tower of Babel is often seen as a story about human ambition, like wanting to reach heaven and maybe even challenge the Elohim.
And I guess the Elohim weren't too happy about that. They scrambled everyone's languages and scattered them all over.
Right. Biglino sees that as another example of the Elohim showing they're in charge and putting humans back in their place.
It's like this constant back and forth, humans trying to do their thing, and the Elohim setting limits.
Yeah, and in all that, you start to see Yahweh becoming more important, especially with Abraham and the Israelites.
But even with Yahweh being more prominent, Biglino's not saying the other Elohim are gone. It's not just a simple one God situation.
No, he thinks there are hints of these other Elohim still around, like they're working behind the scenes, influencing things in subtle ways.
So it's way more complex than we usually think.
For sure. That's part of why Biglino is so interesting.
We've talked a lot about the Elohim as a group, but what about their leader, Yahweh? What's his deal in Biglino's view?
Well, Biglino sees him as one of many Elohim, but obviously a powerful one. He's the one who chooses Abraham and makes that covenant with the Israelites. That sets them apart.
But if he's just one of many, why does he seem to have all the power? Like, why is he the God of gods?
Biglino thinks it might be a few things. Maybe Yahweh was just more active with humans during the time the Bible covers, or maybe the Israelites, being his chosen people, they spread his worship more.
So it's not that he's necessarily stronger than the other Elohim, just that he's the main character in this particular story.
That's one way to look at it, and it makes you question the idea of one all-powerful God. It opens up the possibility of something more complicated.
Which brings up another question. If there were all these Elohim, how did they interact with humans?
Biglino says it was complicated. Sometimes they were creators shaping and controlling human life. Sometimes they were teachers sharing knowledge. And sometimes they were rulers demanding obedience and punishing anyone who disobeyed.
So it wasn't always a peaceful relationship.
Not always, no. The Bible's full of stories about humans rebelling and the Elohim getting mad and punishing them.
Like the flood and the Tower of Babel.
Exactly. And those stories show the tension between humans making choices and the Elohim trying to control things.
Okay, so if these Elohim were real, like Biglino says, where did they go? Why don't we see them around anymore?
That's a big question, and even Biglino doesn't have a clear answer. He thinks maybe they stopped being so involved in human affairs at some point. Maybe they accomplished what they wanted or had to leave for reasons we don't understand.
So they were active participants in human history, but now they're kind of behind the scenes.
That's one interpretation. And it leaves open the possibility they could come back or become more visible again in the future. But for now, all we can do is try to figure out the mysteries from these ancient texts.
It's a fascinating journey. We'll continue it in the next part where we really dive into Enoch and his special connection to the Elohim. All right, so we're back, and we've been talking about all these wild ideas from Mauro Biglino.
Yeah, he's given us a lot to think about.
He has, and for me, one of the most interesting guys in all this is Enoch. Like we mentioned him before, but I think he deserves a closer look.
Yeah, Enoch's definitely unique. Unlike most of the people in the Bible, it doesn't say how old he was when he died. It just says he departed at 365.
It's almost like he just disappeared.
Yeah.
What does Biglino say about that?
Well, he thinks it wasn't a normal death. He compares it to Elijah and Moses, who some people believe didn't actually die either.
So is he saying that Enoch, transcended human limitations because of his connection with the Elohim?
Exactly. Biglino points to stuff in the Book of Enoch about him traveling with the Elohim and learning secret knowledge and eventually becoming like a heavenly being.
Like a superhero origin story right out of the Bible.
I know, right? It really makes you think about human potential and what's possible, especially if you take these stories literally.
So when we're talking about Enoch traveling with the Elohim, how did he actually get around between Earth and the heavens?
Honestly, the texts are a bit vague on the details. But Biglino's theory is that the Elohim gave him some kind of advanced technology.
Like maybe a spaceship or a portal or something?
Would be. It definitely suggests they had knowledge and abilities that were way beyond what humans had back then.
Which brings up a really cool point. If we say, okay, maybe the Elohim did have this advanced technology, it could explain a lot of the miracles in the Bible.
For sure. The creation of Adam and Eve, the Red Sea splitting, the manna from heaven, All that could be explained as super advanced science that people back then just didn't understand.
So what we see as miracles could actually be descriptions of scientific things that seem supernatural to the people who saw them.
Exactly. It changes how we think about what's possible. It makes us consider new explanations for things that we thought were mysterious.
So we've looked at all these crazy stories and interpretations. What's the main thing Biglino wants us to get out of his work?
I think he really wants us to look at the Bible with fresh eyes, to question the traditional explanations and be open to other possibilities, even if they sound kind of crazy.
So it's not about ditching faith or our beliefs. It's about expanding our understanding of these ancient texts.
Exactly. Piglino's work makes us look at the Bible in a whole new way. Like, it could be describing real events, even if they seem unbelievable.
It's like he's showing us a hidden layer to these stories. Like there's more going on than we thought.
And it reminds us that studying the Bible and all these old myths is an ongoing thing. We're always finding new information and new ways to interpret things. It makes us rethink how we see the past and our place in the universe.
Well said. This has been an awesome conversation. So for everyone listening, whether you buy into Biglino's ideas or not, he definitely makes us think differently. He makes us question what we thought we knew and be open to the mysteries of where we come from and what our place is in all of this.
Absolutely, and maybe that's the most important thing we can take away from all this. Never stop learning, never stop asking questions, and always be open to new ideas, even if they challenge what you thought you knew. And on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time when we explore some other fascinating mystery.